My name is Gloria Semme. I'm production engineering and engineering manager at SoundCloud, and I'm excited to talk to you about how we do operations at SoundCloud today. Next slide, please. So just a quick look at the agenda for this talk. I'll first talk about some key areas of DevOps, and I'm sure most of you will know about those. And please one slide back. Yeah, great. And then we'll look into what SRE is and where that actually comes from. And in the end, we'll look at the production engineering at SoundCloud. That's my team, what we do. Are we DevOps? Are we SREs? How do we do operations? And yeah, we'll take a little bit more time to look into that. Next slide, please. All right. So what are actually the key areas of a DevOps or of a DevOps team? What are we trying to achieve in DevOps? One thing for sure is we want to reduce organizational silos, right? So it's supposed to be a way to break down barriers so that teams can actually work together better and more efficiently. We don't want a strict split between developers and operations. Next important point is to accept failure as normal, because we all know computers always fail. They're not perfect, and humans indeed are also not perfect. So failure is actually something that we need to expect and that we need to learn how to handle. Another point is to implement gradual change. We all know when there's PRs coming in that are super long, and we're trying to review them, and it's just a lot of pain, and it's really easy to oversee bugs. So it makes a lot more sense to implement gradual change. Smaller changes, they're easier to review. They also have a lot less impact if they end up being buggy, and it's much faster to roll them back. So the main point here is that we're trying to reduce the mean time to recovery. The next point is to leverage tooling automation. And I think this one is pretty clear. Like, no one wants to manually do the same thing over and over again, right? So the last point, measure everything, is also an important one, because if we don't have any metrics, if we don't have any traces, any logs, like how will we know if something is going wrong? How do we even know how our systems are working, how everything is performing? Next slide, please. So I feel like when I was looking at these points, that like DevOps is actually more like a philosophy. It's a philosophy how to break down organizational barriers and increase the ability for an organization to deliver better software faster. So what's site reliability engineering? And many people have asked me in the past, like, what's the difference, DevOps and SRE? What's better? What's worse? What should we do? And yeah, maybe just to quickly talk about it, how it was formed in the first place. So this term was coined by Ben Traynor, who was at Google, and he was a software engineer that was asked to build an operations team, right? And that was in 2003. And he basically built this concept of site reliability engineering. And I think he's still at Google overseeing that and many other things. And what are they doing to achieve these like pillars of DevOps, this philosophy? So in order to reduce organizational silos, they have shared ownership with developers. So the SRE team, usually there's one SRE team per product, right? They work together with the developers, and they're using the same tools. So the operations folks are using software engineering principles and tools, and the developers are also using like tools that are maybe built for operations. The next thing is to accept failure as normal. And I really like what came out of Google to do that. And they came up with with SLOs, service level objectives. So Google SREs know achieving 100% uptime is not a good goal to have. That's just sheer impossible. And it would be far too expensive to go for that, to build your system as strong that you can actually achieve like 100% or almost 100% uptime. So what they do is basically like the SRE team and the product team, they work together and they think about, okay, what kind of availability target should we aim for? What do we need to achieve? What is okay for users? And so basically there's a lot of negotiation going on there, and they're trying to achieve like the best or the most necessary uptime for that specific project. And if something goes wrong, then there is the postmortem culture. So basically an incident will be reviewed, the failure will be looked at, and it's the teams are trying to find out like what can be done better in order to prevent a failure like that. One interesting thing here is that at Google, with one SRE team per product, the SREs are still carrying the pager. So they're being paged if something goes wrong. However, if the developers, if they're changing, if they're just changing things too quickly and they're not looking into reliability enough, and they may be overspending their error budget, so they can't hold the SLO target. The SREs can threaten to give back the pagers to the developers. And obviously, developers don't want to carry pagers. Who wants to be woken up at night with like a critical thing going wrong? So usually that works very well, and developers will slow down their deployments if they have like already overspent their budgets. The next point, implement gradual change. That's also in order to reduce the cost of failure. Google SREs, they really enforce canary deployments, for example, but this is just one example of how they implement gradual change. Of course, SREs also leverage tooling and automation, and what's interesting there is they have this goal of spending 50% of their time on operations only and 50% on development. So if there's any toil, any kind of like task that comes up again and again, that's just annoying to do or takes time, SREs try to automate that. And last but not least, of course, SREs also measure everything. And additionally to the typical stuff, like system metrics and so on and so on, they also measure toil. It's really interesting. They want to try to find out, like, in order to say, okay, I only want to spend 50% of my time on toil, they need to be measuring what toil is, right? So they measure toil and they try to limit it, and they also measure reliability. Next slide, thanks. So looking at that, I think SRE can be seen as just one specific way to accomplish the DevOps philosophy. Next slide. But what if you are not Google? So Google developed this and for themselves, right? And many companies have adapted it. But like if we're just looking at the difference in scale, well, Google has in numbers of magnitudes, billions of users, right? They're a world company. They for sure have thousands, if not 10,000s of engineers. And one thing that's really clear is they have a lot more engineers than they have services. So SoundCloud, and I hope most of you know SoundCloud. It's a music streaming company and entertainment business. And we're also, I would say, a worldwide company. We have users from all over the world, but our scale is more like, in terms of magnitude, hundreds of millions of users. We're roughly hundreds of engineers. And the main thing that's different is that we have a lot more services than engineers. So how can we do SRE successfully if we're not at Google scale? We obviously cannot have cannot have an SRE team for every service. We can't even have one SRE for every service. So let's look at how we do it at SoundCloud. What's our way to accomplish this philosophy? Next slide, please. Now I get to introduce my team to you, the production engineering team at SoundCloud. We're currently 8 members, and we're the only SRE team at the company. We do consider ourselves site reliability engineers as well as production engineers, and we have a lot of responsibilities. Yeah, but let me just tell you quickly how we're achieving this DevOps philosophy. So for the first point, to reduce organizational silos, we all have one thing in common. We're all super approachable and we love to help. It was really interesting. One team meeting, we're just like talking about what excites us and this, like, why do we do this job? And everyone was like bringing up the same point. Just, I really love to help. And that's something that's really, really important because everyone in the company, developers, everyone knows that we do love to help, and they come and they reach out to us if there's any issues, and we have a good like trust relationship with developers. We also enable teams to own what they build. So I mentioned this before, we cannot be on call for all products, right? There's so many systems, so many products, so many teams. There's no way that one person or one team can know about how all these systems work, can know all of the code, and so on and so on. So that's why we train developers how to react in an incident and how to be on call, so that they can be on call for their own systems and their own products, their own applications. So we don't really have that strict of a shared ownership as the Google SREs have. It's more like really like everyone is on call for their own things. But we do provide documentation and run books for systems, and we're always there to help whenever, even for troubleshooting or whatever it may be. Like, we're always there, but people need to. People are being waked up for their things. So in this sense, we can't really threaten to return back the pager if the team doesn't keep up the availability target, but we can still come over to their tables or remotely write them on Slack and ask them to maybe like review their newer changes a little bit more carefully or something like that, in order not to, overrun the budget even more. We also constantly share our knowledge. We do that currently twice a week, where we have an open knowledge sharing sessions for anyone that can join. And we usually have one more basic one and one that's more advanced. And developers can come up with topics, anything they want to learn about. Could be system administration things, could be specific tools, databases, anything really, DNS. Yes, and we social production readiness best practices. How do we do that? So I think SREs with the SRE team is actually when a new product is being released, it needs to go through like a production readiness review with the SREs, and we don't enforce that. We just socialize it. So whenever you're building a new application or a new product, you can come to us and ask us to review it, maybe do a scale test or run a game day with you. Next slide, please. Okay, how do we accept failure as normal? We do really care about availability, because if the system isn't available, like if users can't play music, like it doesn't matter how good the individual products are. So we really want the system to be available. We want the site to be up and running smoothly. So because we cannot really have an SLO for every product or for every service, because we have so many of those. And we've tried to do that before, but it wasn't really easy, because you need really need everyone on board. Everyone needs to say, okay, we want SLOs and we want to follow this and the guidelines, and we want to, stop rollouts if we overrun budgets and so on. And that didn't work. So now we only have a shared availability target for the entire company. And we measure this with external monitoring of the website. And we basically measure the availability from the perspective of the user, because that's what really matters. And we have a very blameless engineering culture. We encourage engineers to take risks, to work fast and break things, but we also don't want anyone to do like the same mistakes twice. So we have regular incident review meetings where we're looking what happened into an incident. We're bringing many people together. This also helps to reduce organizational silos, and we discuss what can be learned out of that incident to prevent the same thing from happening again. Yeah, and I mentioned it quickly before, like we train engineers on how to react in an incident, because of course, if you wake up, if you are being woken up in the middle of the night, it's really hard to react the right way. So we're basically teaching them a strict way of how to react and how to approach an incident in a way that you can even do it in the middle of the night. And engineers also learn that the most important thing in an incident is to bring the service back up as fast as possible. And that's what usually works. Next slide, please. So we come to the third point, implement gradual change. We also try to have canary deployments. As we don't do production readiness reviews, we can't guarantee it, but we're encouraging people. And whenever we have an incident where that could have been, maybe not prevented, but that could have a lot less impact, we encourage teams to add a canary deployment, for example. We also have quite high quality code reviews. So we encourage people from the same, but also from other teams to review PRs and to review them very thoroughly. We also test for this in our hiring. And we have weak code ownership. So developers can change code owned by anyone. So we as SREs can also go into people's repositories and change things, and then just the owners themselves need to review it and merge and deploy it. Next slide, please. So leverage tooling and automation. We also use software development skills to automate away toil. And our team specifically, we have a lot of different backgrounds. So we have some software engineers, we have even engineer, we have data engineers, yeah, just people from all kind of different backgrounds. And we use these skills that we've gotten in a different area of IT, and we like to automate. We also build systems that automate operational processes. And currently, we are building our own operator for running MySQL replicas in Kubernetes. And this is also with the goal of having fewer operational tasks at hand later on. This said, we're building also other tooling for developers, and we provide self-service platforms. Next slide. Measure everything. This is a really important point for us. I think most of you know Prometheus monitoring, and Prometheus was actually built and born in this team many years ago. I wasn't there at the time, but yeah, we still have quite an ownership of it, and we're trying to continue improving it. And we're currently also running it on Kubernetes. Yeah, we always improve monitoring and observability tooling. And I mentioned this also earlier, we use also external monitoring. And one thing that we don't measure that Google does is we don't measure its time spent on toil, because we're doing so many things. Even measuring just feels impossible for us. Next slide, please. So what's our recipe for success? Apparently, like we're not Google scale, we're quite smaller. And for us, what's really important is that we are all versatile. Like our team has so many different backgrounds and a lot of really large range of skills. So this is really important because there's so many things to do, and we need to switch focus super quickly and get onto something, from troubleshooting to software development to operations to system administration tasks. So there's a lot of things we are doing, and we're all really, really excited to learn all the time. So that's super important for our SRE team. Otherwise, we couldn't do SRE. And that's more like on our side. On the other side is like we're empowering teams. We're really trying to teach them, to learn, to help them, to train them, so that we don't have to do all of the operations. We don't have to carry their pages. And yeah, just this excitement to help is something that's really important, so that people really don't shy back to ask for help. And yeah, just this, like we're living this strong knowledge sharing culture, which has also been super helpful. Next slide, please. Thanks. That's how we do SRE or DevOps. And yeah, I hope you learned something new.
Perfect. Thank you, Gloria. I think this would be the time of a sort of round of applause after both. There's clapping there as well. Excellent. So a few questions coming through. We'll do a sort of panel discussion shortly. Just following on from what you said, Gloria, I think, you know, super important, not just for SRE, but any team, isn't it? Empowerment, knowledge sharing, you know, failure accepted as normal. That was a very common theme from our last DevOps Connect as well, embracing failure, obviously learning from it and then being able to grow from it. Something you said, just the sort of ethos of the team is really loving to sort of help people, obviously at the core of what you do. Is that something that you installed in the team upon joining? Is that something that's across the culture at SoundCloud?
It's actually something that has always been the case, because I think it kind of like happened because we just hired the right people to do it. Because when people were coming into this team, it was in the beginning a lot of internal hires actually, and people knew, oh, that's the team that works with other teams all the time. That's the team that gets to, you know, help, and that gets to jump in and you know, like fix big failures when they come up. And I think like it kind of like drew people towards it, right? Towards the team that have this passion to help. So it wasn't something that we had to implement, but definitely now that we're hiring also externally, we're looking into it and making sure we're hiring people who are enjoying that, who are not like, oh, now I had to help again. It sucks.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? Especially as you grow and the team evolves, it's keeping that at the core of the team, which again brings its own struggles, doesn't it? But and do you see this, Gloria, as you've grown the team? Would you only employ people that have got obviously Terraform, as that's what you're using, or is it something that you'd be open to, you know, teaching? How easy have you found it to onboard people using Terraform?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question actually, because our team we own also like a lot of systems, right? Like from like Kubernetes, then monitoring, Terraform, provisioning, and there's just a small part of it, right? So it's not easy to hire people who have experience with all of that. So for us, it's great if you have Terraform experience. It's okay if you don't, because we know we're hiring smart people that are eager to learn. So we are not worried that you won't pick it up pretty quickly. And Snare was already mentioning it. It's actually quite easy to learn it. And I personally found like it looks more scary in the start, like just like, oh my God, what that? what's all that? But then you realize it's all just like small things that you can use again and again, right? Like it's not as hard as one would think in the start.
Brilliant. Oh, hopefully that answers your question, Mithun. Slightly maybe controversial question, but we've been doing a lot of talk around sort of Google and, you know, how they operate and what they do. on the scale and magnitude of how they do it. Really interesting knowing about the pages. I think completely, yeah, sort of threw me. I couldn't imagine giving all of my team a pager and making them accountable like that, but obviously it works for them, and obviously Amazon and companies of that size do things differently. Question for both of you: if you were in managed a team of that scale, based on obviously Gloria and what you said, is there anything that you would do differently to what they're doing?
Good question.
You have the pages. I think that's my main sort of focus.
Well, in management, I don't have to carry a page. No, I think that's a hard question. It would be interesting for me to know how much knowledge sharing they actually do, because like most of the knowledge I have about how SRE is done at Google is out of their books, and these are also a few years old. So it would be actually really interesting to find out like how they are changing things over the years, because that would show what doesn't work for them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it would be more the study, I think, involved to answer this question.
Yeah, sorry, I'll put you on the spot there. It was more the focus on the pages. And you mentioned your team obviously look after a lot of different elements within SoundCloud as opposed to the one sort of offering. That knowledge sharing is spread across all of the sort of services offered, or do people focus still on specific areas?
Can be anything anyone wants to talk about.
Excellent, excellent. And just lastly, question, the Q&A. So we have a question from anonymous attendee. I don't think this is the person's name. If so, an amazing name. What are the core skills you would be looking for in hiring engineers for SRE?
Yeah, I mean, in general, like troubleshooting is an important one. Like you want people to be able to, keep quiet, keep calm in a stressful situation, and just like look into actually figuring out how to, find an issue, how to, resolve it. That's an important thing. But also, we want people that are excited to learn, that can learn quickly, and that like to work in a team. All these things are definitely important for us.